topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart.
Hello and welcome to It's Your Voice, the show that hosts enriching conversations in diversity. My name is Bahia Yaxan. I'm a diversity educator and a core alignment coach, which means I support organizations and individuals in aligning their actions with their values. If you're interested in looking at some of the offerings I have, you can check out my website at knowwhatyouwantcoaching.wordpress.com. I'm super excited today to have a guest we've had on before, Doug Cobold, and he is with the California Product Stewardship Council. I'm going to read his bio in a minute, but I just want to, it's kind of a segue into his introduction. I just want to encourage any listeners or viewers who did not get to witness 1 minute of a record-breaking floor speech by Senator Cory Booker. It's so empowering, it's so encouraging, it's so inspiring. I'm sure there's all kinds of clips on YouTube. Don't expect you to rewatch 25 hours and 4 minutes, but that's how long it was and how powerful it was. And he referred several times to John Lewis's dictate of make good trouble. When you see something's not right, do something about it. And my guest definitely does that. So Doug, welcome to the show. I really am happy that you're here today and inspired by you and your staff. And in my opinion, you guys are making good trouble because you're thinking preventatively for climate resilience, preventing negative climate change, and for the planet and all the living creatures on the planet. So thanks for letting me just refer to you as a troublemaker. It's a huge compliment, and I think we should all be troublemakers in such good ways.
Thanks, Bahia.
You're welcome. So, thank you. So I'm going to tell you, the title of this show is Hard to Manage Products, What's Next for Climate? And Doug has been, in his words, talking trash for over 30 years. Since August 2018, he has and continues to be the executive director for the California Product Stewardship Council. He will update us on concrete actions he and his staff are taking to decrease climate changes in measurable ways, tackling approaches to old textiles related to reuse, repair, recycle options, and taking on single-use vaping devices initiatives in California. Previously, Doug spent over 18 years with Sacramento County managing contracts, procurement, new recycling programs, development, HW, which you'll have to explain what that is, and pending legislation. He spent nearly 3 years with Edgar Associates providing solid waste consulting services statewide, and over 5 years with Yolo County managing the county's landfill. He holds a civil engineering degree from California State University, Chico. That's a lot of experience. You know, it sounds like you know.
Feels like
Well, thank you for being here. And I know we wanted to talk about at least two of the initiatives, and maybe start with the older one from last year related to Old Textiles that you and your staff put together and helped make happen.
Absolutely, yeah. So thanks again for having me on your show. I'd love to chat with you and your audience. The bill that Bahia is referring to is Senate Bill 707 by Senator Newman. And we passed that through the legislature last year and got it to the governor for signature, and he signed it. That bill is what we call an extended producer responsibility bill, focused on textile waste. And so textile waste is pretty much everything that he is wearing, I'm wearing today, shoes, handbags. It can be hospitality linens, which would be tablecloths, napkins, bed sheets, pillows. If think about it, if it's in the motel room and it can be washed, it also is called textile waste at the end of the day. Belts are also part of that, purses. So the law covers a great deal of different textile type materials that typically a lot of them end up at thrift stores. When we're done with them, they go to a thrift store, and the thrift store sorts through them, tries to find what they can sell in their storefronts, in their brick and mortar storefronts. And whatever they can't sell, they end up bailing in a bale and shipping off to a second or third world country, or possibly just landfilling if it's too nasty or whatever. If we thought it was good and it just isn't useful to anybody, then it'll probably end up in the landfill here in California, and one of the landfills in California. And but if it ends up over in another country, such as like Ghana or other countries, Ghana has had a huge problem with the extra textile waste going there, because those bales get broke open. The usable, sellable shirts, etc., are sold on roadside stands. You may have seen that if you've been in those countries, or otherwise it ends up on the side of the road. And then in Chile, they actually burn. They have big textile burn piles. And so you can imagine what that's doing to our climate. And that's so we obviously wanted to fix this problem best we could. One of the issues with the thrift stores not being able to resell these products is, say I'm wearing a button-down shirt and I lose a button off that shirt. Well, if I turn that into the thrift store, that's a nice thing to do, but they can't do anything with it either, because they have no funding to be able to find a new button, sew it on there, and then put it out in their storefront and hope it sells. So what they end up doing is putting that in that bale, and then it might or might not be used in another country, or it might end up in a pile, going to bad things. So what the bill SB 707 does is it focuses on reuse and repair first. It requires the producers of all of our fashions, our textile fashions, to be responsible for the end of life care of these products. And so if it needs a button, there's funding behind that. So basically what will happen is each manufacturer will pay a certain amount of money for each clothing item, or each tablecloth, each sheet or napkin, into a fund that is then used to support the recycling and repair and recycling infrastructure. If it's reuse, they just need to try and get it to reuse, real reuse, where it's actually resold and actually reused and kept in commerce. If it has to be repaired, or if it has to be recycled, that's where the producers are going to come in, and they're going to be required to actually fund and run that program to make sure those textiles are either repaired and put back into commerce, or they're going to be recycled. And we love to see if it's upcycled. It should go to upcycling first. So the industry has to follow the waste hierarchy, which means reduce, reuse. We like to insert repair in there, recycle, and then dispose if necessary. And so dispose being the last resort. So, and I would also characterize shipping it offshore is almost the equivalent of disposal. So it may get a little bit recycled at the other end, but not really. So that bill, again, it got passed last year, and had no opposition. 180 different organizations supported that bill, and it had zero opposition when it was presented for the last voting in both the Senate and the Assembly. So that's uncharacteristic of a bill like ours. And the governor had no problem signing that bill. Of course, with no opposition, he would have a hard time justifying why he wouldn't sign it. And the regulatory process, the informal regulatory process, is starting this year to start establishing the rules around the law and how the stewardship organization that will run this program for the state not the state of California, but will run the program in the state. They have to have certain rules, and then they have to come up with a plan on how they're going to meet the rule of the law and also the regulations. which will dictate certain things they have to do, like reuse, repair, certain collection convenience standards. So we require a certain amount of collection points throughout the state within every county to make sure it's almost as convenient to take your old item back and recycle it than it is to buy it. Because if it's not convenient enough, it's going to end up in the garbage can, or it's going to end up in the recycle bin where it shouldn't be. Places where it shouldn't go is where it's going to end up, and that's unfortunate, and we want to try to avoid that. So that was a heavy lift. Fortunately, I have a young lady on staff who is a PhD in textile science, and so she was the lead of that bill. It'd be probably better for her to be talking to you today about that bill than me, but she got her master's here in Davis, and our master's and her PhD here in Davis, and so she was a great person to lead that effort, and she continues to lead that effort. We actually have a working committee that is a stakeholder group that's statewide and actually national now, to help to inform the regulators as they develop the regulations. So, and that includes all kinds of stakeholders that might be interested in the textile waste in the program in California. And I should note that this law was the first one in North America, and it was the second one in the world that mandated the producers fund and design and run this program. There is another law I believe it's in one of the European countries, other than France, that is voluntary. So that's why I didn't include that. The two laws, France and Californians, are both mandatory, because we find that voluntary doesn't always work. It's only if they really want to do it do they actually do it, especially if it's going to cost them money. So, so anyway, that was the textile bill. And what's happening with that. But again, I think it's going to be a really great program for California. Oh, and by the way, it relies on the thrift stores. So the thrift stores are still going to be your go-to place if you want. But if your retail store has a take-back program now for their products, that will continue as well. So it's not going to disrupt the existing infrastructure. That's our collection infrastructure. It's just going to improve upon it.
Wow. So
that's that was textiles.
That's amazing. That it seems so broad sweeping, and so for me to be clear, it does sound like a huge and heavy lift. So some of it's still in the design, like figuring out the regulations, and with the committee of regulators establishing it. It's still not completely established. Is that right?
Right. So what we do with these bills, because these are heavy lifts, they take a lot of work in the background to get the program up and running. We usually give 4 years from the date of passage to when the program should be starting to be implemented. You get it, the state agency that's going to be providing the oversight on this particular program is Cal Recycle. It's our state waste and recycling agency. Cal Recycle has to do what we call informal rulemaking, where they go and they solicit all kinds of feedback from stakeholders across the spectrum to make sure that the regulations that they draft and adopt pursuant to the law are going to work and they're going to make sense. So they'll spend a year doing that, and then if that doesn't work, or once that's done, then they'll go into what we call formal rulemaking. And in the formal rulemaking process, it's much more concise. There's less back and forth. It's more about, here's the regulations. All stakeholders get to comment on them. They revise the regulations as they see necessary to meet the intent of the law. Sometimes they can't make changes because they don't have the statutory authority to do that. It wasn't in the law to begin with. So sometimes that can require cleanup legislation later on, another bill to clean up the last bill. We do have that from time to time. And then once the regulations are finalized, then they go to the Office of Administrative Law for California, who then reviews them, make sure it works for all statutes. It has no conflicts with any other parts of the existing law. And then once they recommend its adoption, then the Cal Recycle can adopt the regulations. Then they become official. Then that starts the plan process. And the plan process to run this kind of a program is we give them about 9 months to get the plan together. They have to get their members together. Hopefully they're already working on that during the regulations process too, but they're trying to figure out all the parties that are obligated under the law. They have to bring them in, get them all signed up because they're going to be paid into the program. And they're developing the plan. So they got to develop the plan around the regulations and the law, but also around what the membership of the organization is going to require. And then finalize that plan, and then they can start implementation. And then we usually give them at least a half a year or a year to ramp up for implementation, getting the program running. And then that kind of starts the clock that they have to start being compliant with the law. So it's about a 4-year process. It's not an easy thing to do, but at least we know in 4 years we're going to have something going.
That sounds tremendous. And how do you does this include all producers of textiles in California? Like how many producers will have to become accountable to these guidelines and regulations when it's established? Is there
that number? We don't know, but it's not just California. Yeah, it's so a lot of the clothing we buy comes from offshore.
Of course.
And we don't have any. We have Cal Recycle. The state has no influence or has no enforcement capabilities for offshore entities. It has to be so what we do is we design the law around who is bringing it into the state. So once it hits the state, because we can't enforce beyond our own state boundaries. And so if you are a brand like Target, I'll pick on them just because, but I think they're going to be just fine. Target has their own brand. And so when Target brings that article of clothing into the California marketplace, they are now obligated under the law for that item because they are a brand. So if we can't get the producer, or if there's producers in California, then we can get them. So if they're outside of California, it's less likely we're going to be able to enforce on them. We being Cal Recycle, the state agency. So but as long as we can get somebody, so we go after producer first. Our hierarchy, our kind of tiered structure is producers first, then first importer. So because folks can bring material in that's already branded and ready to come in. So we'll get the first importer of that, or we'll get the brands. And so there might be brandless shirts or pants or whatever that come in, and then they get a brand on them by an entity here in either North America, California, United States or California. So we'll get them under the brands. And then we go down the list, and at some point we may even get the retailers. But typically, the only time you're going to get the retailers is when the retailer is the brand, like a Target, for example, or a Walmart or something like that. So we get a super majority of it. The one area that we're still struggling with, and this is a struggle in the law as well, is when you have direct consumer. So Temu, if you're familiar with Temu is a direct to consumer type of operation. They will ship directly from the producer in, say, Asia or another country straight to the consumer. Well, now there's no way to get to that. And so we're still trying to figure out how because those become free riders in the program. And so how do we deal with the direct to consumer? And that we're hoping we'll try to figure out in the regulations process. But that's the only kind of escapee that we know of is going to happen. But otherwise, pretty much everybody else is going to be captured one way or the other.
That's incredible. I mean, I can't imagine the difference it's going to make. And I know it's going to be measurable, but it's going to be, I don't know, phenomenally impactful, it seems.
Yeah, well, let's hope that we can, if we can, and we see this younger generation that's coming up now, they're going more to the thrift stores. So wouldn't it be wonderful for them to have more choices when they go to the thrift stores, or for not even to the thrift stores. Let's start seeing the retailers and the brand names that have storefronts starting to carry, some of their older clothing in case people don't want to pay for the new clothing. They want the brand, but they don't want the expense of the new. Maybe they can buy the old and be very happy with that. Popular. So it'll be interesting to see what pathway this takes.
Yeah, I can imagine that could be popular, and a lot of people will love the take back the idea of a take back program.
Yeah. Well, I will tell
Cool.
you, the thrift stores are going to love it too, because, and they were very helpful, because they get a lot of clothing they can't sell, and all they can do is bail it and ship it, and maybe get a couple pennies per pound for it. So it'll be really nice for them to have other options. And this also, instead of being a waste product that ends up on offshore somewhere else, we're now creating jobs, which everybody loves to hear about, creating jobs. Well, think about the repair industry. If they are getting used clothing that just has a small tear in the shoulder or something that they can sew up, or even put a patch on that looks really cool, and then that can go back out into the commerce, that's a job. That's a job that's being supported that was not there being supported before, because that item or those items were all being shipped away.
And to think of like the negative impacts we're currently having and have had a long time on other countries, just the images you have of like the, those burning, the burning practice in Chile of the bales we have sent, and in the Ghana example too. It's just like, just appreciate your helping us think much more broadly about how we're impacting not just, our home, our state, our country, but let's be mindful and accountable to the rest of the world.
Yeah, and it's really hard to describe that scene of burning piles of textiles or beaches, beaches covered with this. If your listeners Google either clothing washed up on beaches Ghana, or textile burn piles Chile, they will see what we see, and that will, it's an eye opener. Wow.
Gosh,
that's what we took on. That's one of the several things we took on last year, last couple of years. So, but I'm happy to talk about where we're headed.
Please.
And yeah, so we partnered up with a couple of our old friends who we partnered up on a battery EPR bill. So I mentioned extended producer responsibility, who has to fund and run and all that, design all that, which is the producers. So we had passed a battery bill back in 2022 that was going to require the battery manufacturers, the Duracells, Energizers of the world, the Kirklands, so to fund and design, fund and run a take back program for loose household batteries. So that is in the regulations process right now. That's going to start up here, and that was passed in 2022. That particular thing, and then there was also an embedded battery. But those same, so there was two other organizations that teamed up with us, Californians Against Waste and Rethink Waste out of San Mateo County, to get those two bills passed. One was for embedded battery products. The other one was the loose battery EPR program. So we've teamed up again with them because we were so successful, and we added another member to the band. So we got the band back together and added another member, which is CalPERG. It's the Public Information Research Group. And so the four of our organizations teamed up to start to initiate AB 762 under Assemblymember Jackie Irwin. And that bill is to ban the sale of single-use vaping devices in California. You might ask, why do we want to do this? Why do we want to ban these products? Well, about 160 million of those devices are sold every year in the United States, and put end to end, that can stretch from Sacramento, California, all the way to Rome, Italy, and back a little bit. And those are, the majority of them are landfilled because they're improperly disposed of. About 10-15% may be properly collected. And if they are collected, they are incinerated, they're burned. Because the problem with the vape devices is you have a hazardous waste, a pharmaceutical hazardous waste, which is the nicotine. You have a battery that is typically a lithium-ion battery that can cause fires, and I'll get into that in a minute. And then it also is e-waste because it has a circuit board, because it's electronic, because it's an e-cigarette. And then it also has plastic all around it. So it's a plastic waste. So you have four different components to that device. that cannot be easily separated, and are
Wow.
actually, and in the single-use devices is not meant to be separated. Now, to add to this, there is single-use vaping devices that are sold on the market that are actually video games. And if you haven't seen
What?
those, just do a video game e-cigarette. Oh yeah. Yeah. So it comes with one of the older style video games that you can play when you're done puffing on your single-use cigarette, e-cigarette. And there are also vaping devices that are now embedded in hoodies. So instead of the strings that you tie your hood
Wow.
together with, there are tubes that come out you vape off of. And then there's
Wow.
also vaping backpacks. And so the vaping industry is getting very smart about how they market their stuff. They're
Wow.
not slowing down, but unfortunately they also are not, they don't manage their waste. They don't have any responsibility whatsoever. Single-use vaping devices don't have a place in society. They don't need to be here. There are refillable ones. You can buy a refillable one. It's about 4 times the cost of a single use, but it pays for itself over time. And you can change the pod, the nicotine pod, which is the hazardous waste. You change that out. That's a lot easier to dispose of for household hazardous waste facilities if it's just that pod. You have the battery that's rechargeable. The device is long lasting. So there's all the reasons in the world to use a refillable, reusable device than the single-use ones. But unfortunately, the single-use ones are very prevalent. Here's another really interesting fact about these single-use vaping devices. The majority of them are made in China. They are not legal to sell in China.
Oh,
So a
wow.
product that is very popular here
Hmm.
is illegal to sell in China.
Hmm.
Complicate things further. The majority of the ones that get to our shores do not go through the proper channels, and they're called illegal or illicit devices because they don't pay the taxes, the sales, and so they're sold illegally. And so that because there's taxes on tobacco products that the federal government gets, the state governments get, the local governments get. Well, if it doesn't show up on the books, it doesn't get those taxes. So a lot of these devices are actually sold illegally. So that is a huge problem, because now even if you wanted to try and fund this program, you're not going to get the majority of them. They're not going to fund the program. And so, but with the refillables, those are very much tracked. They are very much have the taxes assessed to them. So they are a tax revenue for fighting against tobacco in general, tobacco, nicotine use, etc. We're also not singling out just nicotine devices. We're going after any e-cigarette type single-use e-cigarette. So whether it's cannabis, non-nicotine or nicotine, it doesn't matter. We're going after all the single-use devices because they just shouldn't exist. I mentioned the fires. So here's one of many reasons why these things are bad. We are having regular fires in our collection trucks. We're having regular fires in our material recovery facilities, landfills. Even the day of you're burying your trash is getting buried, or weeks or months later, we're having fires in landfills. There's a fire going on right now in a landfill in Southern California that has been going for so long they can't put it out. It's an internal fire, but it's forced the closure of that landfill, so that's no longer a resource. It's hard to say whether that was a lithium battery or not, but it likely was. But to put in perspective, when a truck burns, a garbage truck burns, that's $450,000 to $500,000 loss to the company that owns it or the city or county that owns it. When a material recovery facility burns, that could be millions of dollars in loss, depending on how bad the fire gets. Not to mention now, all these fires are all of our firefighters, our first responders are being exposed to these unnecessary fires. And so that's why we passed the battery bills I talked about earlier 2 years ago, and why we're going after this one now, because we're hoping to deal with the other types of batteries, but we still have these vaping devices that shouldn't be on the market and shouldn't be sold. So that's our target right now, AB 762, to try and eliminate these vaping devices in general. We've got some pretty interesting opposition, mostly, and I'm still confused by this opposition, because they state that yes, 90% of the devices that are coming in are illicit, they're illegal. So why are you banning the 10% that are legal? And I'm kind of scratching my head. Well, wait a minute. Okay, so there's confusion between which ones are legal or not. The enforcement is difficult. Well, if you ban all of them, there's no question about if it's a single-use device, it's illegal. You can go and take care of that situation. Another thing we put into our bill was if you're a retailer, if you have a tobacco license, and you were caught selling illegal devices, you lose your license to sell tobacco. And that's kind of the hammer to stop that side of the trade. So if they're selling behind their counter and they get caught, they lose their license, they're out of business. So it's going to stop the illegal trade, at least from the storefronts, on selling these illegal devices. And so we thought that was a good thing. But it's just interesting to see even a law enforcement agency association say, well, this is not a good bill. We oppose this bill. It's like, we're going to try to make your job easier by giving you more enforcement tools, because less confusion, and try to get these things to go away. And you're worried about the legal ones over the illicit ones, which are much worse. And so that's been an interesting wake-up call that we didn't expect. We did expect we thought the smoking cessation groups were going to come out and oppose our bill, because the fear would be, take away the vaping devices, they'll go back to cigarettes, right? Cigarettes. The cessation folks don't feel that way. They agree. They think get rid of the vape devices because, one, it's easy for the kids to get them, right? It's a lot easier for a kid to hide that they're vaping than to hide a cigarette. So
definitely.
So this should help. This should help with that. So, and I think that's what the cessation folks, I'm guessing that's what the cessation folks are seeing, is that this will help to stop the underage smoking and addiction that comes with it. So it's we believe this is a good bill. We're hoping it'll get through. There's going to be a lot of stiff opposition. The other challenge we have is for the legal ones that are sold, there is tax monies, funds that are associated with that. And if you take away these products, the argument is, well, you're going to take away funds, and the state hates when we take away funds. And so, but I would argue also as a counter argument that you take away the single-use ones, the folks that are continuing to smoke or use the vape devices will go to the reusable ones, like I mentioned before, about 4 times as much. So they're going to pay the tax, and on a legal device, that's 4 times as much. Yes, they won't be buying them over and over and over again for forever, but we'll see. I think we're going to see either a stabilization or even an increase in the tax revenues, because more of the legitimate devices will be sold than the illegitimate ones. So that's our bill.
Wow, you guys have quite a think tank.
Well, it takes 4 organizations for this one, because we're up against the tobacco industry. That's a challenge.
That's huge. That is huge. Wow, I have so many questions, but I'm just thinking, since you mentioned underage, that it just coincidentally today that the Supreme Court decided to uphold the FDA's block against flavored
sale of flavored tobacco and flavored tobacco devices. Yeah. So, but that was only flavored, so that doesn't get to the menthol or the other ones that are unflavored that are still getting in the hands of the kids. Now, the flavored ones are still on the black market. I mean, that's the challenge that the enforcement agencies always have. They got to deal with the black market, and that's where, again, they're saying that 90% of these e-cigarettes that we want to ban are also sitting in that black market. So, but if you can shut off the spigot, why not? Just cut them off.
Yeah, they could see you as like a very helpful resource.
We'd like to think so.
Yeah. Well, how I was going to ask one question is, how can people support this bill, getting approved and moving forward?
They should contact their legislator in their area. Look up their assembly member, their senator. This is an assembly bill, so it is working through the assembly now. It actually goes up for a hearing next week. Its first hearing. And it's so if they contact their local assembly member and say, hey, now since it's in committee, it will only be maybe up to 9 committee members. Some committees are a little larger, get to 11. Those committee members are going to be the first to see the bill. They're going to be the first ones. They're the first gate to get through. And so as long as you get a simple majority vote out of that committee, it moves on to the next policy committee. These are called policy committees. And then From there, it will likely go to the fiscal committee, which is appropriations. And if there's a cost to the state, then that needs to be considered. And in this case, there's going to be two costs to the state. There's going to be the enforcement cost, and then there's also going to be the potential tax revenue loss that they think is going to happen. And so those will be two things that will be very challenging for the appropriations committee to think about and overcome and say, yeah, we want to still move this bill forward. Now, it's very possible they'll see the logic behind this, or they'll understand it's not a huge impact, and they'll move it on to the next place, which would be then to the floor of the assembly. That's when the majority of the assembly members, all of them, will see it. And that's the time when, regardless of where you live, if you should reach out to your assembly member in your district and say, hey, this bill AB 762 is a good bill. We really need to do this. You need to vote yes for that. That's where that becomes important, because then once it gets approved in the assembly, the entire process starts all over again over in the second house, which would be in this case the Senate. And then the Senate, and then you want to reach out to your senators in your district and tell them, hey, this is a good bill. We want to see this get through. And so that's how folks can get involved. It's just by reaching out to their elected officials in their districts.
Okay. And are you saying AD or as in?
Oh, AB is in boy.
Okay.
Assembly
so
bill.
A is in apple, B is in boy.
Yes,
assembly bill. Okay.
Yeah, assembly bill. Yeah, exactly. And then Senate bill is SB.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah, I get in the habit of acronyms. Easy to do.
AB 762. And vote yes. So it's not too soon. If it or is it to make a call now, since it's going to committee
it's never
next
too soon.
week? Okay.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
never too soon to make that call and start encouraging the electeds to consider voting in favor of the bill, without a doubt.
Okay. Just writing it down. Everybody write it down. AB 762. Another reason to call our elected
Exactly.
people. So how much of what your job is as the executive director is planning the next target, or is it or do you already have, like, among your staff and partner agencies, like 20 other things already that you need to address?
We have a list. We absolutely have a list. Unfortunately, the list keeps growing. So, and that's because one of the problems we have with our consumeristic economy is that new products are created every day, which is great. I love new products, but none of them are coming in with a end of life solution. So none of them are being designed to be more durable per se. Some are. They're not necessarily being designed to be reusable. They're not designed to be repairable. They're not designed to be recyclable. And when I say recyclable, easy to take apart into their various components, and then those components are ground up, reconstituted, and put back into a new product, maybe the same product. And so without all those pieces, we generate a lot of waste that we shouldn't generate. And that's where the problem comes in, is how do we shift all that? How do we shift that behavior? And it's ingrained in us, unfortunately. And so when I don't drink out of plastic water bottles unless I have to. I always use a stainless steel because it's better for my health. And I save, every time I have a bottle like that, I save a plastic water bottle that I didn't have to use. Not to mention I don't get the microplastics from the plastic. So
there's so many benefits to just being more aware and just changing a habit, maybe one habit at a time.
Exactly.
It's kind of unbelievable that, that's one pathway is for all of us individually to think of what could I do now? What's the next step I can take without overwhelming ourselves? But also, it's just kind of unbelievable how we don't have accountability regulation in place yet, like for new products coming out. That's just, I don't know, unbelievable.
Yeah, one of my board members, he's up in the Pacific Northwest. Basically, he's up in the far reaches of California. His position is no product should be introduced into the California marketplace that doesn't have an end of life plan.
Okay, so is that
And
going
he's
to
not
become a
wrong.
bill? He's totally right. How about that? That's a good way to put it.
That is a bill that I don't think would survive. Honestly, I
No.
don't think it would survive. You
Oh,
are basically picking a fight with every manufacturer of every product imported into California or made in California. So you can imagine your opposition, how large that would be. So that's why we tend to pick our battles, and we pick product types, and we pick the worst of the worst as much as possible to get them out of the stream. Our focus, because we were created, CPSC in 2007 was created out of local government. The local government wanted to have a single voice in the capital to talk about extended producer responsibility and product stewardship. They formed CPSC. It is its own 501c3 nonprofit, and so we rely on contributions, of course, like you do. It's a nonprofit as well, and so it makes it, of course, a challenge. But we can also act on behalf of the local government, that the local governments that fund us, to make sure that they've got that voice in the capital to try. And by our sheer mission is to take the obligation of the end of life costs of products off of the local governments, who pass that on to the ratepayers at the curb, and push that back to the producers so that they will make those better design decisions early on.
so you definitely have to. You know what you're doing. It's easy for me to say, why don't you just write that big, massive bill that will stop any new producer from doing anything unless it's durable and recycle. So you just pick. You have a long list. You pick the worst of the worst. You try to tackle it in the most reasonable, passable way.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah. And so from that list, we reach out to our local governments to find out what is their biggest pain, biggest cost of that year. So each year we look to our local governments to say, this is really a problem for us. This is really a problem for us. And then our board makes this final decision on what product categories we choose. We try to only pick 2 per year. They're always heavy lifts, and so there's only so much time for my staff. There's only so much time for our hired lobbyists to be able to spend time in the Capitol to fight these bills. Unfortunately, right now I'm running 3 bills. So we ended up with a 3rd one, which it's a good thing, because we're doing a carpet program cleanup bill this year under Assemblymember Aguilar Curry, who happens to be yours and my assembly member. And then we're also doing, besides the vape bill, we brought back from last 2-year session, which was 23-24, we brought back our solar panel EPR bill, extended producer responsibility bill. So we're trying to make sure that solar panels, when they reach their end of life, have somewhere to go besides a landfill out of state, which is what happens to a lot of them. We want those materials recovered and recycled and put back into making new panels. Or a lot of the panels, what we're finding, which was really interesting there, just to change subjects a little bit, but for solar panels, we're finding out that a 20 to 30 year solar panel, the average life on a roof is 9.1 years. Because people are upgrading their systems, they're getting the first or second electric vehicle, they're getting a battery wall to power their house at night. So all of that's putting demand on their system, and so they need a better system. If they don't have room to add more panels, they replace the panels with higher efficiency panels that generate more power with the same footprint. And so therefore these panels are coming, and they really should be going to reuse. They should really be going to places where folks can use them, but that infrastructure doesn't exist as it should. It really needs to. And so we're trying under that bill to try and take the same textile approach to solar panels and get the system where these panels can be reused or refurbished so they can be repaired. And so we live to our hierarchy, which is durability, reuse, repair, and then recycle. When we look at our bills.
That's fantastic. So you're also doing this carpet initiative and the solar panel. That's the second and third ones you're working on this year.
Is the vape devices. Yeah.
And the vaping,
So,
yeah, in addition
busy
to the
year.
vaping. Wow. Can I ask how many
Yeah.
staff you have and how many lobbyists you have? Or that there are?
Well, we have 6 staff, including me. There's 6 staff, including me. And so I have 2 directors under me who do an excellent job. I'm lead on the carpet bill. Joanne, who I mentioned earlier, my PhD with textile science, did the textile bill. She is on the solar panel bill this year. And then our director of administration, Nate, he's running the vapes bill. And then we back each other up. And then we have 3 other staff that are support staff that help us to get things done. And then I have 2 lobbyists at the one firm that try to help us get all this done. And they spend more time in the Capitol than we do. We come up with the bright ideas and say, go make this work. So,
wow, what a team.
with a little help from us.
Wow. Well, I see we only have 4 minutes left, which is stunning how quickly the time goes by. I just want one correction.
Good. I was worried we were gonna have too much time.
No, but I just wanted to clarify we're actually an LLC, not a nonprofit, because I nodded when you said just like you are, but just even though we don't make anything close to a profit, it's officially an LLC. So what are your closing thoughts? What should we take away from this conversation? I like the action of calling our assembly members and our senators on, at least on the vaping proposal, and telling them, our representatives, to vote yes on AB 762. What else could we do?
Well, I would say just change your lifestyle a little bit. Like you saw with me with the stainless steel water bottle. Don't buy the plastic water bottles if you don't have to. It's there's perfectly good water coming out of the tap, or certainly out of a water filter system. If you got that in your home, you don't really need the water bottles. So anything you can do to reduce the consumption. So the hierarchy starts with source reduction, which means don't make it in the first place, or if you do, make it with as little material as possible. And so if you don't use a plastic water bottle, that's source reduction. Then if you're going to get it, make sure it's reusable, like the water bottle. Make sure it's a reusable water bottle. And then try to repair things before you just throw them away. Well, try to get somebody else to reuse them. if someone else wants even if you give it away for free, it's amazing how much stuff you can give away for free. People would love to have that don't necessarily want to go buy the new item. And then certainly be careful with your thrift stores. Don't inundate your thrift stores with all the stuff. A treasure for you may not be a treasure for them. So I'm always careful with the thrift stores and make sure that folks don't dump a lot on them. Because one thing I did find that was interesting was in my time at the Sacramento County was in being in the landfill business, how much money thrift stores spend on stuff they throw away every year. Thousands and thousands of dollars they spend on just landfill disposal fees because of stuff folks thought that they could really use that they can't use. It's broken and they don't fix it. So if your listeners think that they give them a broken device, thrift store's not going to fix it. It's going to go to the trash unless they have another outlet for it. And most of the time,
we should just sew our own buttons back on and keep wearing our shirts, or
there you go.
wash the stain out.
Exactly. Exactly. If you can do that, you should. Yeah. So
that's good.
There's a lot of things folks can do in their own life. The choices they make a big difference every day.
Excellent reminder, and a great note to close on. Really, thank you so much, Doug. I really appreciate you coming on. I appreciate all the work you and your team do at the California Product Stewardship Council. It's really remarkable agency, and always encouraging to hear your work and to be encouraged to do our own individual work. So thank you also for the inspiration. I also want to thank our
it's always
engineer.
A pleasure. Always a pleasure.
I'm glad to hear that. And thank you, Rebel, our engineer, and Dean Piper, our producer, and all the listeners and viewers. And thanks for spreading the word and reducing our use of products we don't need. And May we all have enriching conversations in diversity next week. And I'll see you next Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time on Talk4TV or W4CY.com. Thank you.
Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech.